Chapter 5 The Paper Route. At 4:30 in the morning, the alarm clock rang. It kept ringing and ringing until finally I found the right lever to turn it off. Boots slept on. There was a moment when I couldn't remember why I had set the alarm. A moment when I didn't feel worried or guilty, only confused and tired. And then I remembered. It was like the anvil falling on the coyote in the cartoon I'd seen at the movies. I knew it would be dark at 4:30 in the morning, but I didn't know how dark. It was dark as time. Mom made me crawl into the belly of her old cold furnace and patch a hole in the firebox. My flashlight went out, and Mary Lou did this every single day. I wanted to climb back into bed, but I couldn't let Dad down. I couldn't let Mary Lou down. I had to do this, like it or not. So as I got dressed, I took stock of what I knew. There were 2 different papers to deliver to the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. Some houses only got the Tribune, some got only the Sun-Times, and some got both. Mary Lou had them all memorized now, but I knew she had a huge metal ring of 2 by 4-inch cards with the names and addresses and subscription details of everyone on the route, which she used when she first got started. All I had to do was find that ring, which meant I had to go into her room. I don't know why that seemed so scary. Of course I'd been into her room 100 times. She was my sister. But somehow, knowing that she wasn't there made it seem like I was walking into an abandoned gold mine. "Come on, Boots," I called. My dog opened one eye and stared at me, but he obediently stretched and crept over to my side. Together we walked across the hall and pushed Mary Lou's door open. No one had closed the blinds, so moonlight streamed in through the uncovered windows. Everything glowed silver, as if it were radioactive. The room was tidy, the desk neat, no clothes or books left on the floor. I stood there looking for a long time before I finally managed to force myself to step inside. I was careful not to look at the empty bed and went straight to the desk. I opened the top tower. There, on a pile of papers, was the ring of cards. Well, that was one piece of luck. I grabbed the ring and ran out of there, like the town thief running from the sheriff. In the kitchen, I glanced at the clock. Somehow, it was already almost 5. How much time had I spent standing at the edge of Mary Lou's doorway in the darkness? If I wasn't back by 7:30, I'd miss the bus. So I grabbed a cold piece of cornbread from the for breakfast and wolfed it down. Boots and I trudged out to the garage, and I opened up the door. There were 3 or 4 bikes in there, all in a jumble, each of them with a giant square wire basket and on the front. I pulled out mine, which was red, but the front tire was flat. A piece of glass was stuck in it, probably from the scrapyard. I didn't have time to patch it, so I pulled out the blue bike Mary Lou used. I felt her presence hover around me like a ghost as I walked the bike to the front of the house. There was a huge pile of papers on her front porch. I knew that Mr. Reynolds and his old World War II Jeep had dropped them off there each morning, but I had never seen them before. The pile was as tall as I was. I tried to pull out a couple, but the papers were tied together with bawling wire. So it was back to the garage to find a wire cutter. Once I had the stack open, I stuffed as many papers as I could into the basket on the front of the bike. I'd have to come back and get the rest. I may have had another moment of despair then. I may have considered going back inside and waking Dad and telling him, "I can't do it." I may have even dreamed of crawling back into my nice warm bed, but if so, I'm not admitting it. I glared at the papers. They stared back at me. Then I get on the bike, and with Boots trotting beside me, rode off into the dawn. Except that it was still dark. And if I'm being truthful, what actually happened was that I only made it halfway down the driveway before I fell off the bike. It wasn't my fault. Balancing on a bike was way different with the stack of papers hanging over the front wheel. Half of the papers fell out of the basket onto the gravel drive. That was just the last straw. My sister was burned, and it was my fault, and now I couldn't even do a stupid paper route to help my family out. Boots came over to lick the tears off my face. Did I say there were tears? Of course cowboys don't cry, but I felt completely alone, so I may have cried for a minute or two, till I realized no one was coming to rescue me. I stood up, put the papers back in the basket, and walked the bike down to Fairview Avenue. That was the eastern border of the route, and it was paved, so I'd have smooth pedaling and it wouldn't fall off, I hoped. I'd finally gotten the hang of riding with a full basket by the time I reached the old Czech couple's house. Their real names were Mr. and Mrs. Kopecky, but everyone called them Pa and Ma. He was skinny as a broomstick and always wore a bow tie. She was round as a barrel. Ma opened the door at the exact time I was opening the screen to put down her paper, and scared me half to death. "You the Wilson boy?" she asked. She wore a loose flowered dress that made her look like a big bouquet. I nodded. "What's your name? Johnny? Walter?" "Tommy," I admitted. "Tommy," she repeated. "How old are you?" 12, ma'am. Same as my grandson, Ricky. He visits in the summer. You know him?" I'd seen him on the baseball field. I knew he was an only child fussed over. You could tell because his haircut was always neat and he wore his white shirt and good leather shoes to play ball. He had a new mitt, too. I tried to dislike him, but he let me use his glove. And if someone's willing to loan you his glove, well then you just can't not like him. I nodded. "Hold on a minute." She disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and reappeared with a sausage that she tossed to Boots. "I was going to eat that," Pa called from inside the house. "You have enough," Ma called back. "Dog is too skinny." Boots gobbled up the sausage before she could change her mind. "Thanks," I said with a smile. I could have done with the sausage myself. Ma smiled back. "We're praying for your sister." I nodded again, scared that if I said a word I would burst out crying. When I was halfway through the metal ring of address cards, I went back to the house and refilled my basket. Then I began the western part of the route. First stop was the Mackenzie's grocery and sundry store. Mr. Mackenzie had taken over the store after old Mr. O'Malley had died 2 months before. Mr. Mackenzie was a gypsy, a big man, not fat, but every time I saw him it seemed like his suit was just a little too small. He was always friendly enough, but with his dark hair and wild bushy eyebrows, he always reminded me of a grizzly bear. I wondered if he had a crystal ball in the apartment he lived in above the store. Mr. Mackenzie was outside sweeping as I rode up. "You're Tommy, right?" he asked. "Yes." I held out the paper. He grasped it tightly. His hands were large and thick, fingers twice the size of mine. "I was so sorry to hear about your sister." I nodded. "Sam was burned when he was a baby," he said. It took me a minute to realize he was talking about little Skinny, the new boy at St. Joseph's, who had joined our class when school started 2 weeks earlier. Eddie and I had christened him Little Skinny because he was so fat. He also had a big scar across half his face. I hadn't realized that Mr. Mackenzie was his father. "A burn is a horrible injury," Mr. Mackenzie continued. "I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy." All of his talks of burns and injuries was making me uncomfortable. Mary Lou was nothing like Little Skinny. She was my beautiful, sweet sister, and she was going to be absolutely fine. "Okay," I said finally. I could feel him watching me as I rode off. He was just being nice, like Ma and Pa, but their sympathy made me feel like I wanted to throw up. I was almost done with the route by the time I had reached Mrs. Scully's house. She was young and pretty with blonde hair styled like Marilyn Monroe's. Her husband had died a year or so before. She lived in the big house all alone, living her earning by taking in sewing and mending. She waved from the front porch when she saw me. I was afraid she'd call out her thoughts about Mary Lou, too, but she didn't say a word. I had one final stop, our next-door neighbor's house. Actually, it was more like a shack. So run down, it looked like the big bad wolf had already blown it over. An old Russian woman who played the accordion lived there. And as I threw her paper onto the front porch, I had the sudden thought that maybe the daily worker had come from her. But the sun was fully up now, so I had no time to mull over the idea. I knew it had to be nearly 7:30, but I was too scared to look at my watch. I was huffing and puffing as I turned into our driveway. Boots' tongue hung out as I threw the bike into the garage. "You're late, Tommy," Mom hollered from the kitchen. I ran inside and yanked down my school uniform, navy pants, white shirt, and tie. Mom handed me my lunch and satchel. I took them without looking at her and dashed back outside. The bus was waiting on the corner. The driver, an old woman with gray hair who always smelled of cigarettes, cleared her throat as I climbed on. "Heard what happened to your sister," she said in a low voice. "I'm very sorry, but I'm afraid I can't hold the bus again." I nodded and collapsed into a seat. I'd done it. I'd delivered the papers. I should have felt proud or relieved or something, but as I watched Boots bark at the bus as it pulled away, all I felt was sick that Mary Lou wasn't there with me, and dread that I'd have to do the paper route again tomorrow morning. By the time we got to school, 4 different people had told me that they were so sorry. Eddie had asked about Mary Lou twice, and I was ready to slug anyone who mentioned her again. I practically ran to the chapel. As I slid into a pew, I could feel the weight of home falling off my shoulders, like a horse shrugging off a saddlebag. At St. Joseph Catholic School, we had a mass every morning. That meant 35 minutes of peace and quiet. Well, except for the standing up and kneeling and chanting in Latin, but I could do all that in my sleep. And even if I forgot some of the words, I'd just get a real pious look on my face, lower my voice, and say, "A fiery horse with the speed of light, and a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-ho silver." I love school. Oh, the nuns like to pretend they were mean, but the worst they do is get out a ruler and rap you on the knuckles. Not that anyone misbehaved. No, sir. St. Joe was run like Ike's army, which was okay by me. I liked knowing what was going to happen. At home, if I accidentally dropped a plate, sometimes Mom would laugh and call me slippery fingers and help me clean it up, and sometimes she'd yell for an hour and send me to bed without dinner. After Mass, we'd say a prayer for anyone who was sick or died or anything like that. First, our prayer list was always Cardinal Joseph Minditsky. He was the leader of the Catholic Church in Hungary and had spoken out against the communists who had taken over Hungary after the war. He was arrested, tortured, and at a sham trial in 1949 sentenced to life in prison. So every day we bowed our heads and prayed for his release. I should have known what was coming next, should have expected it when Sister Anne stood up and said she had a special announcement. Like all the other nuns, Sister Anne wore a habit complete with a black and white wimple. She was tall and thin, except for her nose, which looked a little like a pickle. Yesterday, one of our very own students, Mary Lou Wilson, was burned in a terrible accident. There was a gasp from one of the 8th grade girls. She must have been the only one who hadn't already heard. I longed for earth to open up and swallow me whole. "Please keep Mary Lou and her family in your prayers," said Sister Anne, "especially her brother, Tommy." Everyone turned to look at me. I slouched down lower in the pew. All I wanted was to not have to think about it for a little while. Did that make me a terrible brother? Yeah, it probably did. I'd never been so glad to file into our classroom and start to work on spelling. Lizzie Johnson was selected to hand out the composition notebooks. I groaned. Oh, she was cute enough, with curls like the little orphan Annie in the comics, and enough freckles to make it look like someone had sprinkled pepper on her face. But she always batted her eyelashes at me and spoke in this high-pitched baby voice. It was really annoying. According to Mary Lou, I was handsome, with dark brown hair always kept neat and trimmed, and deep brown eyes, as rich and gooey as chocolate-covered raisin. Her words, not mine. Who wants gooey eyes? But I liked being good-looking. I mean, who wouldn't? When I smiled, even the nuns would soften and give me the benefit of the doubt when I was being naughty. Tommy didn't really mean to knock over the trash can. Tommy didn't really mean to bump into you, even if I really did. But sometimes at night, I'd lie in bed and wonder, what if I hadn't been born good-looking? What if I was like Eddie, with blonde hair that jutted off at odd angles and blue eyes that weren't quite the same size? When we got into scrapes together, he'd often get in trouble instead of me. I asked him about it once. "Aw, Tommy, you're just a smooth talker," he had said, but I wasn't sure that was the real reason. "Hi, Tommy," cooed Lizzie when she reached my desk, just like I knew she would. "Hello, Lizzie," I said. "I'm so sorry about your sister." I frowned at her. "I don't want to talk about it." Sister Anne was writing spelling words on the board, and I pretended to concentrate on that. "Did she really burn up like a firecracker?" Lizzie asked. Her blue eyes were sparkling, but whether from concern or excitement I could not tell. Eddie glared at her. "He said he doesn't want to talk about it." "Well, I was just asking," Lizzie said. I pulled a composition notebook from the middle of the stack, causing her to drop all the ones on top. They fell to the floor with a crash. Sister Anne whirled around. "Lizzie Johnson, what are you doing?" "Tommy made me—" "Are you handling the notebooks, or is Tommy?" "I am," Lizzie admitted. I sat piously in my seat, my hands folded over my nap, folded neatly on top of my desk. "Well, if you can't do your job in an appropriate manner, I shall have to ask someone else." "Sorry, sister," Lizzie said, bowing her head. Sister Anne turned back to the chalkboard. Lizzie bent down and picked up the notebooks, but before she moved on to the next desk, she stuck out her tongue at me. She kind of reminded me of Mary Lou when she did that. I swallowed, trying to force down a lump in my throat. Eddie leaned over to me and whispered, "Did you bring the paper?" "Which paper?" I asked blankly. The paper. Oh, yeah, I checked my satchel. Sure enough, there it was, right where I had put it, right before. Here it is. We gonna show it to the choir boys at recess? I nodded. That's the plan. The choir boys were what we called Luke and Peter. They lived in the nice part of town, and Eddie and I had kind of a rivalry with them. They were always showing us the new pocket watches or army knives they'd gotten. Now we finally had something cool to show them, because fighting commies was one thing we had all agreed on. I hated communists almost as much as I loved cowboys. But before recess came spelling, and then reading, and after that religion, and then it finally was time to go outside. There was no empty field or anything like that. The oldest boys in 8th grade, that was Mary Lou's class, brought out long wooden black and white construction horses and used them to block off the cobblestone street in front of the school. They set up a couple of sawhorses in the middle of the street too, creating 2 sections. One was for girls to skip rope and play hopscotch. The other was for us boys. The nuns walked in circles, keeping an eye on everyone. When the nuns were at the far end of the street, I gestured for Peter and Luke to follow Eddie and me over to a big elm tree. Got something to show you, I whispered. What is it this time? Luke asked, rolling his eyes. His mom must have made him get a haircut every 2 weeks, because his dark hair was always neatly trimmed. But he had a twisted arm from a bad case of polio in 2nd grade, and it just kind of hung at his side. Nobody dared say a word about it, 'cause that'd be bad luck, and then maybe they'd catch polio too. Peter snickered. He was Lizzie's twin brother, and they looked a lot alike. He also had curly red hair, which he kept cut very short so it wouldn't curl too much, and a face full of freckles. Mention the resemblance, however, and Peter was likely to slug you. Unlike Mary Lou and me, Peter and Lizzie didn't like each other. Probably another stupid comic book. I grabbed Peter's tie and yanked hard. He stumbled and almost fell on the cobblestones. Hey, I said. Just 'cause Kid Colt Outlaw isn't as famous as the Lone Ranger doesn't mean it isn't a good comic, too. Watch it, Peter snapped, rubbing his neck. That hurt. Oh, poor baby, I teased. Come on, said I. Just show them the paper. I pulled out the Daily Worker and held it up so they could read the masthead. Their eyes went wide. All right, Luke said. Now that's pretty cool. A real commie paper? Peter explained. Where'd you get it? Luke asked. Before I could answer, Sister Ann started walking toward us. I quickly rolled up the paper and stuck it in my back pocket. She frowned when she reached us. What are you boys doing? Nothing, said Eddie. Just deciding who's going to be it, I added. Then I suggest you go run and play, she said sternly. We will be reviewing fractions this afternoon, and you will need to sit very still. I nodded. She walked up. Tag again, scoffed Luke. Electric chair tag, I said. Peter nodded in approval. I'll be Mr. Rosenberg, he said. Luke can be Ethel. Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg were convicted of spying for the Soviets. Just last June, they were executed at Sing Sing prison. I'd seen pictures of them in the paper, walking to the electric chair. Mary Lou said it had given her nightmares for a week. I thought it was kind of exciting. I don't want to be Ethel again, Luke protested. Why can't I be Julius? Better run, you two, I said. Almost time for your execution. They ran. Luke was fast, but we finally caught up with Peter by the horses that divided the street in half. Eddie grabbed one arm and I the other. Peter flailed wildly between us, yelling, I don't want to go to the chair. The chair was over by the elm tree. We started to drag him toward it. Tommy! I glanced up. There was no one there, but I swore I'd heard Mary Lou clear as day. I knew what she'd say. You cut that out right now. Sister Ann is going to see you in a second. Didn't she say last week that the next person she caught playing electric chair tag was going to get a call home? She had, and the last thing I needed was a call home. So I dropped Peter's arm. Eddie gave me a puzzled look. Peter took advantage of the moment to twist out of the grasp. Giving up already? No, I said. I just decided I wanted to play kickball instead. We played kickball a lot at school because of Luke and his arm, but I didn't usually change my mind right in the middle of a game. I'm sure they would have protested if it hadn't been for my sister. Okay, Eddie said. Let me go get a ball. As he went off to find a ball, I could feel someone watching me, and I turned and realized it was little Skinny, Mr. Mackenzie's son. He wore the same clothes as the rest of us, a white shirt, dark pants, plain tie. But his were a size too small, and he was built like his father, making him look like an overstuffed sausage. Worst of all was the scar on his face, shaped like a saucer that had shattered, but not yet fallen apart. It was red and raised and covered his left cheek and half of his nose. It made my skin crawl. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Nothing." He stared at the ground. I'd become the freak now, the one with the burned sister. It made me angry. I knew just how to make him feel uncomfortable. "Hey, little skinny," I called, making my voice as friendly as possible. "You're the one." He looked up confused. "The one what?" "The one who's going to come play kickball with us." He shook his head. "Aw, come on, it will be fun," I said. "No thanks." Eddie had returned with the ball. I caught his eye and he nodded, understanding my signal. We ran over to Little Skinny and grabbed his arms, trying to pull him into the game. Little Skinny froze like a big round turtle, as if he were trying to pull himself into his shell. Peter and Luke stared at him, laughing hysterically. "I don't want to play," Little Skinny moaned. "Tommy!" I let go suddenly. Little Skinny jerked away from Eddie. He looked like he was about to cry. Sister Anne was heading toward us again. "Are you all right, Samuel?" she said. "Fine," he muttered, and he ran off. Sister Anne looked confused for a moment. I thought she was about to ask what had happened, so I figured I'd better cut her off. "May I help you with something, sister?" I asked. "Yes," said Sister Anne, turning her attention back to Eddie and me. "I thought perhaps you boys might do me a favor." "Of course, sister," Eddie said. "We are almost out of chalk. I was hoping you two would run to the store and fetch me some more." She smiled, a wide, fake smile that made her pickle nose wiggle. She was only asking me because of my sister. I hated her pity. "Still, you didn't say no to a nun." "Sure," I said. "We'd be happy to." Sister Anne nodded and pressed a coin into Eddie's hand, and we set off to Mackenzie's grocery and sundry store. Chapter 7. The Yo-Yos. Main Street in Downers Grove was only a few blocks long. There was a hardware store, a drugstore, a bakery, Toon Funeral Home, and Mr. Mackenzie's store. A new, bigger supermarket had recently opened across town on Ogden, but Mom still preferred Mackenzie's because it was so close to everything else. Mr. Mackenzie was outside opening a box when Eddie and I arrived. He was sweating and had his sleeves rolled up. I could see some sort of tattoo on his left forearm. Even though there was a razor cut on his chin, he already looked like he needed another shave. "Tommy," he exclaimed, as if we were great friends. "Hello," I said. "Who is this?" he asked, referring to Eddie. "I'm Eddie Sullivan, sir," Eddie said. "Nice to meet you." Mr. Mackenzie shook his hand eagerly. "You boys go to school with my son." "Who?" asked Eddie. "Sam," I said, nudging him. "The new boy." "Oh, the one with the scar," Eddie said. "Yes," Mr. Mackenzie said. "It happened in the war. There was an air raid, and we made it to the shelter. We thought we were safe." He stared off into the distance. "But a bomb caused a water heater to explode, and it scalded his face." Eddie and I looked at each other. We didn't know what to say. "But enough talk of sad things," Mr. Mackenzie said, shaking his head as if it would shake off the bad memories. "Look what I got in today." He gestured to the box. Eddie and I peeked inside. There were rows and rows and rows of yo-yos. They looked like huge lifesavers, red and green, yellow and blue, pressed up in a roll together, just like the candy. They were so bright and shiny, like the happiness on a string. I winked at Eddie. He nodded. We were going to steal them. "Don't do it," I heard Mary Lou tell me. I ignored her. Only 25 cents each," Mr. Mackenzie said. I looked at Eddie again. We had a whole technique. One person distracts and charms, the other takes something. "No!" "Shut up, Mary Lou," I said. "After all that's happened, I deserve a treat." And she went quiet. "Yo-yos are great," I said. "But actually we need some chalk." "If you have some, please," Eddie added. Mr. Mackenzie nodded. Of course, come on in." Eddie followed, and I scuffed my shoe at the dirt, like I just noticed something was on it. Eddie passed me and whispered softly, "Hi, yo, Silver." That was the signal. As soon as they were gone, I reached into the box and picked up a yo-yo, a blue one, like a ripe plum. I stuck it in my pocket. It was too easy. I could hear Eddie and Mr. Mackenzie talking in the shop. No one had seen me. My pulse beat faster, like it always did when we nicked something. I picked up a yellow one, slipped it into my other pocket. Just like picking a lemon. One for me and one for Eddie. They came back then, and Mr. Mackenzie gave me a funny look. For a moment, I thought he had seen me steal the yo-yos. They felt huge in my pockets, large eggs as heavy as rocks. We'd always taken little things from Mr. O'Malley, the previous store owner, gum and matches and things like that. He'd never caught us, not once. Of course, he was old and half blind, but that wasn't why. I knew the trick of stealing things. You've got to be bold. I smiled at Mr. Mackenzie's help and held his gaze. Thanks for your help, sir. Mr. Mackenzie smiled back. Nice to see you both, he said, and he went back to unpacking the yo-yos. My breath caught in my throat. Would he notice that 2 were missing? No, he didn't say a word. Eddie waited till we were halfway back to school before he elbowed me in the ribs. All right, Tommy, what'd you get? I pulled out the blue yo-yo and handed it to him. Cool, Eddie breathed. You're the best. I felt great that we pulled one over on a grown-up, and even ended up with loot. When we reached the playground, I pulled out the yellow yo-yo and skinned the cat and rocked the baby, and the 3rd and 4th graders gathered around, oohing and eyeing like I was a hero. But the whole time I could feel someone watching me. I looked around. Sister Ann walking toward me. You're back already? Yeah, I said, uncertain. I should hide the yo-yo, or pretend like I had already had it. The new guy doesn't like to chat, like the old O'Malley. Eddie handed her the chalk. She took it with a nod and walked away, then stopped and turned back. Nice yo-yos, she said. Yeah, I said. I got them for my birthday. That's right. Happy birthday, Tommy, she said as she walked off. I breathed a sigh of release. I'd gotten away with it. Again. But a few minutes later, when Sister Ann rang the bell and signaled that recess was over, little Skinny caught my eye. I realized that he could tell his father that Eddie and I had come back to school with yo-yos. Of course. But he probably wouldn't. Why would it even come up? But I didn't sound very convincing, even to myself. After school, as I got off the bus and started walking toward our house, my stomach knotted up again. I thought about riding my bike over to Eddie's. Sometimes I did that, but honestly I wanted to know if there was any news about Mary Lou. As I stood on our stoop, gathering my courage, Boots ran up to me. I scratched behind his ears and tried to imagine I was as brave as Gary Cooper before he goes to face the villains in the final shootout. Finally, as Boots bounded off to chase the squirrel, I took a deep breath and pulled the front door open. Mom, I called. I'm home. There was no answer. Of course, there wasn't any crying either, so that was a good sign. I walked into the living room and took off my tie. Have you heard anything about Mary? Someone cleared her throat and I looked up. Mom stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing a navy blue dress with white trim. She held a red yo-yo in her hands. I stopped by Mr. Mackenzie's store this afternoon, she said. The small jeweled body rolled up and down with the string like a drop of blood. I needed to pick up a few items for supper. He was in quite a tizzy when I arrived. Apparently, someone sold 2 yo-yos like this one from his new display this morning. It wasn't me, I said automatically, then cursed myself for my stupidity. Nothing says I've done it more than denying it before Mom even asked. The yellow one felt hot as coal in my pocket. Mom ignored me. Mr. Mackenzie was quite sure it was one of the public high school boys who had taken them, until his son came home from St. Joe's. Crap, little Skinny. He said you 2 had new yo-yos at recess today, just like this one. She made the yo-yo fly over toward me, said it hit me in the chest. Do you know anything about that? I froze, knowing there was no right answer. Finally, I shook my head. It was like a dam broke in my mom then, and all her rage came pouring out. Why, Tommy? She screamed. Why would you do such a thing? Why? I didn't know why. They were shiny and new, and they were there, and it had never been a big deal before. Still, I knew it was wrong. Outlaws steal, not cowboys. So I just shook my head again. You embarrassed me, she yelled, a vein bulging from her forehead. You're going to go back and help him on Saturday mornings to make up for it. The 2 you stole, and this one too. She kept bouncing the yo-yo up and down frantically. My heart beat faster and faster, in time with the toy. Finally, the string slipped off her finger, and the yo-yo went sailing across the room. It hit a vase on a side table. The vase teetered, then crashed to the floor. I winced. Pisa nua cholera, Mom shrieked. Busa had sometimes lapsed into Polish when she was happy or excited, but Mom only spoke Polish when she was really angry. It sent a shiver up my spine. Sit down on that couch and stay there till your father gets home. That meant a whipping. Dad always gave us 1 lash for each birthday. This would be my first time getting 12. I sat down on the couch and sighed. What did you say? Nothing. Tommy, I heard you. I just sighed. The vein on her forehead pulsed. I changed my mind, Mom fumed, eyes wild. I'm not going to wait for Dad. Don't move. She stormed out of the room. I couldn't help shaking a bit as I waited for her to come back. Stop it, I told myself. You've gotten a spanking 1,000,000 times before, but Mom had never whipped me. Mom returned with Dad's spare belt coiled in her hand. It was dark brown leather and a little worn around the edges. Go into the kitchen, Mom ordered. But, stand up, she screamed. So I did. I walked into the kitchen with Mom following close behind. The afternoon sun shone in through the window over the sink, bouncing off the yellow tiles on the walls. Your pants, Mom prompted. This was standard procedure for a whipping. I didn't mind so much with my dad, but it was humiliating pulling down my pants and underwear in front of my mom. I put my hands on the kitchen counter. The sun was shining in my eyes, blinding me, but I could hear the sound of leather as it flew through the air. 1. It hurt. The first few hits were always the worst. I hadn't braced myself for it. 2, 3, 4 weren't as bad. Mom started yelling again, but didn't listen to what she was saying. 5, 6, 7, the belt whipped through the air. 8, 9, it made a whistle and then slap as it hit me. 10, 11, 12. I relaxed. Then she hit me again. After 3 more, I said, Mom, that was 15. But she kept hitting me. Mom hit harder than Dad, and I had to bite my tongue not to cry. I glanced back, and for the first time, I noticed Pinky cowering under the kitchen table, watching with wide eyes. Mom, I cried. But she didn't stop. Mom kept hitting me, again and again, until finally the belt snapped back and hit her on the chin. She yelped and stopped. In the quiet, I could feel each individual welt on my buttocks. There were tears on my face, but I wiped them away. It's all right, I said, pulling up my pants. I had stolen the yo-yos. Mom had to punish me. The anger ran out of Mom's face, her cheeks changing from flushed to pale. If she had started crying, I didn't think I could handle it. I had to say something. I deserved it, I sputtered. Yes, Mom bit her lip. Yes, you did. She slowly rolled up the belt and left the room. Tommy, Pinky said, crawling out from under the table once Mom was gone. You okay? Yeah. She touched my arm as if she was going to give me a hug. I jerked away from her. Pinky began to cry. I picked her up and let her sob on my shoulder. It's okay, Pinky, I said. I stole the yo-yos. Mom had to punish me. It's okay. But it wasn't. My butt hurt and I wanted to cry too. I'd never seen Mom so out of control before, but I had to hold it together for my sister. Dad came home early as Pinky and I were picking up pieces of the broken vase. What happened, he asked, taking off his overcoat. I told him about stealing the yo-yos and Mom punishing me. As I talked, he sat down on the couch, as if I was sinking him with my words. She wouldn't stop, Dad. She wouldn't stop. Oh, Thomas, he sighed, shaking his head. You shouldn't provoke your mother like that. I know it was wrong to take the yo-yos, but I've never seen Mom like that. He didn't believe me. Tommy, she's having a hard time. With Bouja dying and the new baby and now Mary Lou, we just need to be a little more patient. I couldn't explain it right. If only Mary Lou were here, she'd make him understand. How is Mary Lou? I asked. The same, Dad said. The doctors don't know if... His voice broke and he turned away so I couldn't see his face. Come on, he said gruffly. Let's get this mess cleaned up. Chapter 8, Duck and Cover. I thought getting up at 4:30 a.m. was hard the day before. I'd been wrong. It was nothing compared to the torture of pulling myself out of bed on that second day. My rear was so sore, so I rode standing up, which meant my calves hurt before I'd even gone a mile. I wasn't used to so much exercise, and with the beating on top of that, every muscle in my body ached, even my eyes from squinting against the wind. I was so tired. If Khrushchev himself had appeared on my street, I'm not sure I would have noticed. My balance was terrible and I fell off 3 or 4 times, but I kept getting back on that bike. Ma and Pa were out in front of their house, chasing 3 escaped chickens that were running in circles in the street in the pre-dawn light. Pa, tall and thin, with whiskers like broom, sighed when I handed him the paper. In my country, Tommy, I was a doctor. Here I chase poultry and sell eggs to make a living. He smiled, but the wrinkled skin around his gray eyes still made him look sad. Got one, Ma yelled, holding a hen high up in the air. She's our best layer. Pa sighed again and went to help his wife. At Mackenzie's store, I threw the paper at the door without even stopping. The lights were already on at Mrs. Scully's, and with the dress mannequin in every window, it looked like she was having a breakfast party. The Russian lady was playing the accordion, a hymn we sometimes sang at school, even though I'd never seen her in our church. The only good thing about the paper route was that it meant I didn't have time to have breakfast with Mom. School was slightly better than the day before. Instead of going to our classrooms after Mass, we all shuffled upstairs to a big assembly room and were shown a film. The movie started with a silly cartoon turtle named Bert and a funny song that went, duck and cover, duck and cover. But only really the little kids giggled, because the movie was about how to get ready for an atomic bomb. According to the film, if there was a threat of an atomic bomb attack, a siren would sound and we should all stop what we were doing and get to a safe place. That might be a basement or a hallway. Even ducking under a desk would help, as long as you remembered to cover your head and neck. Eddie nudged me as we watched the film. You can come to my bomb shelter. Thanks, I whispered back. But if there wasn't a warning, if the civil defense hadn't noticed a bomb in time, the first sign of an atomic bomb would be a huge, bright flash, brighter than any light you had ever seen before. The bomb could explode at any time of the year, day or night, the narrator instructed. We must be ready all day, every day, all the time. Even on the school bus, or riding our bikes to Boy Scouts, or playing baseball with friends. There was the part of finding commies I didn't like, worrying about how I'd protect myself and my sisters. When the movie was finally over, everyone was quiet. Sister Anne led us back to our classroom. We are going to do our very own air raid drill, she informed us. Just like you saw in the movie, I will count to 3, and when I get to 3, you will all get under your desks and duck and cover just like you saw in the film. You will stay in that position, absolutely quiet, until I give you an all clear. Are there any questions? Lizzie shook her head. No one said a word. 1, 2, 3. Everyone leaped out of their seats and dove under their desks. I curled myself up into a ball and pressed my hands over my head and neck, just like Mary Lou had instinctively done when she had been burnt. I could picture her, smell the fire in her burned skin. And suddenly, I couldn't stay in that position another second, not even if there was a real atomic bomb. I picked my head up and looked around the classroom. All the students were huddled obediently under their desks, their eyes hidden. Even Sister Anne was squeezed under the big desk at the front of the room, her wimple providing extra protection for her head and neck. It was all too much to handle. How could we worry every second of the day and night? I had to do something, anything, to break this tension. Lizzie's foot was just a few inches in front of me. I reached forward and pulled her black Mary Jane right off her lacy white sock. Eek! Lizzie screamed. I dropped the shoe and curled back up in my duck and cover position, peeking out between my fingers. Who said that? Sister Anne demanded from underneath her desk. I said absolute quiet, Lizzie Johnson. Was that you? Yes, she admitted. Someone took off my shoe. If there was a real atomic bomb, Sister Anne reminded her, the last thing you'd be worried about was your shoe. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could feel Lizzie's gaze on the back of my neck. Sure, she was going to rat me out, but the seconds ticked by and she didn't say a word. Finally, Sister Anne crawled out from under the desk. It has been a minute now. You may all stand up. At least everyone was too distracted by the drill to ask me about my sister. Later that day, despite being more tired than an Indian pony on a buffalo hunt, I started winning the marble game at recess. I had knuckled down and captured all of Peter's marbles and was working on Eddie's last big shooter when, wouldn't you know, little Skitty walked by. Of course his shoe was untied. A normal person would have just stumbled or something, but oh no, he tripped and fell right onto me, pushing me into our game and scattering the shiny glass cat's eyes I'd won all over the blacktop. You idiot, I yelled at him. Now look at what you made me do. I didn't do anything, he mumbled. He'd scraped his arm, and I could see a little drop of blood run down his elbow like the red yo-yo Mom had gotten from Mr. Mackenzie. Suddenly, like a great wave washing over me, I was furious. You told on me. What? Asked little Skinny, confused. You told your dad about the yo-yos. You're a rat. No, I'm not, he protested, but his lip trembled, and it wouldn't have been obvious to even Pinky that he was lying. Eddie jumped up. Tattletale. I didn't say anything, little Skinny wailed. I grabbed his tie, tight around his fat neck. Admit it. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the ground. The choir boys gathered around, watching like we were on a television show. You are going to be sorry you were ever born, yelled Eddie. Yeah, I agreed. Now I have to go help in your stupid shop every Saturday. I bunched his collar up in my fist. The scar on his face glistened with sweat, like a stop sign in the rain. Admit it. Tears leaked out of little Skinny's eyes. Okay, I told. I punched him in the stomach. He bent over double and glanced at me, bewildered. But I admitted it. My heart was beating faster than ever. You can get expelled for fighting, Peter said. Shut up, I yelled, even though it was true. You could get expelled. You gonna go tattle to Sister Ann? No, Peter said, backing away as if he were scared of me. That made me feel even worse. I'd never actually hit anyone at school before. Mary Lou always stopped me. But she wasn't there, and I hadn't heard her say anything, even in my mind. Had she died? I ran to the bathroom and threw up. It took a long time for my heart to slow down. Finally, I washed my mouth out with water and returned to the street. No one seemed to have noticed I'd been gone. Eddie was off tossing a ball with another guy from our class. The nuns were tut-tutting over little Skinny's cut arm. Lizzie was jumping rope. I wanted to thank her for not telling on me about the shoe, but I didn't. The choir boys were busy gathering up all the marbles, the blue ones and the green ones, and even the big shooter with the silver and gold sparkles inside. I knew tomorrow they'd suggest we play again, and would divide them up fairly, but I still felt so angry. I wanted to cry.